After a great 5 podiums in 6 races, Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin were considerably underwhelmed at the Spanish GP, as the AMR23 revealed its actual limitations for the first time. Aston Martin have been one of the only teams that hasn't bought big updates yet. Will this cost them in the long run? Alonso's weekend was compounded by an early error in qualifying that caused floor damage, despite a fast start that put him in 6th place at the end of lap 1 and within striking distance of the front. However, it became evident very early that the double world champion had no answer for the Red Bulls, or even the freshly improved Mercedes, at least on soft tyres. Lance Stroll had a similar afternoon, finishing in P6 but missing the performance to fight for the podium. Mercedes appears to have unlocked additional speed with the most recent W14 modifications, adding on their competitive early season racing performance and providing promising signals for their future path. With this in mind, Fernando Alonso pondered on his afternoon in Barcelona, sure that Aston Martin will rapidly recover with new information. After starting quite far back, I was able to recover, but only up to a certain point. Both Russell and Checo were faster than us today, so there was a lot of work to do, he told the media post-race. Looking at the constructors, it's true that Mercedes gained some important points, but we again gained points on Ferrari. In Canada, we'll bring more things, and in Silverstone too. It will all depend on which team is bringing updates. Even then, with a normal qualifying, we would have started alongside Hamilton and could have had some better chances. I think it's just one race, and then in Canada, we crushed them. The stinging portion of Fernando Alonso's comment was aimed at Mercedes rather than Red Bull, with the Brackley team making a great stride forward with the redesigned side pods and upgrades for the W14. The Spanish GP was the first occasion Aston Martin's conservative approach to development in early 2023, focused instead on understanding their relatively aggressive package, became costly in comparison to their immediate competitors. Aston Martin have planned major improvements for the upcoming Canadian and British Grand Prix, which will be a critical sequence of races for the team's growth in the development race. A substantial wind tunnel allocation and a solid foundation with the AMR23 provide the Silverstone team with everything they need to reproduce the mid-season gains they made last season. While calling last weekend's race a serious concern would be an overstatement, it does serve as a warning that remaining competitive with the top teams may be a greater task than breaking out of the midfield. But what went wrong for Aston Martin? Apparently, they just didn't know what to do during the race. As Aston Martin entered the Spanish Grand Prix without a strategy, according to Fernando Alonso. The Spaniard finished 7th in his home race, trailing teammate Lance Stroll after starting 8th on the grid, with the AMR23s unable to compete with Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari. Mercedes grabbed an edge during the first stint when George Russell, who started 12th, was unrivaled for speed on his soft tyres. Alonso said of the strategy struggle, "We didn't have a plan, to be honest." The Spaniard started on softs and drove quite a few laps on the red tyre before going in for another set of softs. Lance Stroll was also on the move on that strategy, but all the other 18 drivers were not. On the first stint, George was so fast that when he overtook me, I think we changed our mind a little bit. We didn't want to run that close to the cars in front, we just tried to extend the first stint, and by doing so, we extended the second stint. We knew that our opportunity was in the last 15 laps of the race, but not enough to fight at the front, just to fight the midfield, Alonso said. The Aston Martin took a step back on high fuel compared to its qualifying performance, with Stroll dropping from 3rd to 6th early in the race. But Alonso was quick to point out that this was not a race-specific issue for the team, adding, "In Miami, we were so confused in free practice, and then we qualified on the first row. From there, the race was easier. In Monaco also, we struggled a little bit in practice. We qualified 2nd, and then from that point, we secured the podium. We didn't really show the pace of the car until Barcelona. The last few races were a little strange and qualifying biased. Let's analyse, but I'm happy with the race." Could there be another reason that caused Aston's setback? As in the first 6 races, Aston Martin and Red Bull were the only constants in the field. However, following his home game, Grandmaster Fernando Alonso was humiliated by many of the responses. "We lack the speed, both on the soft and the hard tyres. No strategy would have brought us any further today." Fernando Alonso made no excuses for his terrible performance. In 6th and 7th position, Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso conducted damage control. "We concentrated on the Alpine and AlphaTauri at the back instead of Mercedes and Ferrari at the front," Alonso said. It was unclear if the first damper for Aston Martin was due to the circuit layout, the upgrade, the car's setup, or just the fact that the competitors had taken a larger stride with their new parts so soon after the race. According to Alonso, you just never established the correct weekend rhythm, tiring yourself out on Friday between Pirelli tyre sets and data collection for the upgrades. "It took us longer than usual to set up the car." This meant that the Aston Martin AMR 23's normally mild handling of the tyres got out of hand on Sunday. Depending on the temperature, the same type of tyre sometimes worked better, sometimes less, said team manager Mike Crack in amazement. His demand? "We have to understand why." But he refused to speak of a defeat. "We shouldn't be too disappointed with the result. Despite the problems, we still scored solid points. More than Ferrari, less than Mercedes." And let's not forget that Alonso's issues began when he went wide onto the gravel at the last corner of his first lap in Q1 in Barcelona. He rebounded to finish 12th in that session and 7th in Q2. With the car in better condition for Q3, Alonso thought he might still make the front row, but a mistake on his last lap dropped him to 9th. During the break between sessions, the crew was able to progressively fix the flaw, but Alonso faced the extra problem of not knowing exactly how the car would perform each time he stepped out. He's since gained a grid position because of a penalty for Pierre Gasly. "It was opening the first lap in Q1, said performance director Tom McCullough, and he had a snap on the way in, whether it was a little damp patch or probably pushing a bit hard. So it was just more of a low grip snap, the track not quite in good enough condition. When you fly into the gravel trap at that speed, it's just like sandblasting the car and the underneath. The strakes and everything got a real beating. It ripped off some of the vanes and winglets underneath as well. So yeah, we were definitely quite suboptimal with the car." While the crew in the garage worked to enhance the car for each session, engineers at the team's headquarters kept an eye on the shifting balance. "The first run through the gravel trap did a lot of damage," McCullough explained. "We were able to, each time the car was in the garage, repair the car, and actually slowly improve the car to the point that near the end of qualifying, we'd nearly got half of the deficit back from the data side of things. And also, we have a group of people monitoring the data back at Mission Control, able to tell us the overall load loss and aero balance loss as we're evolving through the sessions, which makes it really good for the race engineers to be able to adapt the flap angle and try to get a balance on the car." Despite the constant influx of information, McCullough underlined that it was difficult for Alonso to acclimatise to a car that changed every time he drove it. "I think the Q1 damage in particular was really big," he noted. "So the fact that he made it through that was good. What was a little bit hard for him is every run we were preparing the car. We didn't actually know how much better it was going to be aerodynamically, and therefore the aero balance until we'd actually run the car and got the data. So he was having to adapt, and he's very good at it. So he did a really good job there." Regarding the crucial Q3 lap, he added, "Unfortunately, Fernando then in the end on his new set of tyres in Q3 went a bit deep to turn 10 and ran wide onto the damp patch. This caused Alonso to start further back than hoped, which also, with the lack of pace, made it a bad weekend overall to try and reach the podium again. For now, it looks like Aston Martin are not fearing Mercedes' big upgrades that got them a double podium in Spain. They expect to be back at the front in Canada again after some big upgrades. Will they be able to regain the second position in the constructors' standing soon? Let us know your thoughts on Aston Martin's changes this season in the comments down below. It's becoming a more and more interesting battle for second place this season.